Hello, welcome to the instructions for Module 8 of this course. In Module 8, we will be exploring the central concept of identity. Identity is so important in general psychology courses, but in particular in multicultural psychology because we're really considering the spaces where we develop our sense of identity, different components of our sense of identity. This really leads us to being able to examine how people who come from different places are going to have different senses of identity. In particular, in this module, we'll also be really taking the opportunity to examine intersectionality. Before I jump into this discussion on identity, I'd like to remind you all about the typical assignments that you will be completing in Module 8. Please be sure to read and review both the article as well as the article summary. Take some time to review the PowerPoint, and then you will be completing assignments for points in the module. These assignments include your video response, which will center on intersectionality. And then you will be completing your usual discussion board and peer responses. And for evaluation purposes, you will be taking Chapter 8 quiz, and we will be finishing up Unit 4 by taking the Unit 4 exam. As usual, if you have any questions or concerns about any of these assignments, you are more than welcome to post those on the course Q&A board. You are also welcome to send me an email, and we can always set up a Zoom meeting to discuss any confusion that centers in this particular module or in any aspect of the course. Okay, let's take a moment to talk about identity theory and relate that to the field of multiculturalism. In your PowerPoint, I gave you a lot of background information on classic theory in psychology. When we look at identity theory, we're really looking at the work of Erikson, who proposed stages of life development, and the fifth stage is based on the development of identity. This is particularly important in the Western world as we see people going through an identity crisis during adolescence. This type of crisis is less common in non-Western countries that center on a sense of identity based around the group as opposed to emphasis on individual identity. Once we take into account Ericksonian theory, we can map on to other development of identity, and we see that in the different theories around types of identity. For example, we consider what it means to be part of an ethnic group and what role ethnic identity plays in your sense of self. We can also look at racial identity and biracial identity for those who belong to multiple racial groups. There's also a lot of work that's done around gender identity and other areas that have specifically to do with identities that are prominent in particular cultures. This leads to the notion of intersectionality. This might be a new term for you, and so intersectionality is looking at the place where multiple parts of our identities intersect. And in particular, Kimberly Crenshaw's work that you will see within this module centers on the historical marginalization that we see African American women facing because they belong to two separate groups. They belong to an identity group that centers on gender and sex in terms of biology, and they also belong to a group based on racial identity, meaning being part of the group of African Americans. Historically, there's been a lot of marginalization around that because we can ask ourselves, which group is more important? right? Which influence uh, tends to drive the experience of African American women? We could look at other groups of women, or we could look at groups of men. Here, the idea is that in psychology, we can appreciate multiple aspects of identity. These identities may at times conflict, they may complement each other. Here, the notion is we don't need to look at identity in terms of one single construct. Many of you, as you're thinking about your own senses of identity, can tap into multiple layers of identity. And if you experience racism, prejudice, discrimination based on multiple levels of identity, we would consider that in the area of addressing intersectionality. Okay, so I will see you back in the next module instructions.